that something?
Yeah. No, that's on my end. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. All right. We are live on YouTube and on Zoom. And I'm so glad to be here with you, Arielle, and to be both doing kind of a debrief and a celebration for like the incredible things you've accomplished over the 8 years. I'd imagine everybody watching knows that you were the editor-in-chief of Jewish Currents for 8 years, and you have recently become the editor at large so that you can have more time to do things you love and to also not be driven into the ground daily by the incredible amount of work you were doing. Um, so thank you for spending this time with us. Um, and I kind of wanted to get started just hearing about like what Judaism was for you growing up. I know that you've like done this in other interviews and other outlets, but yeah, what role did Judaism play in your life, and like how did you conceive of what Judaism was while you were a kid growing up?
I grew up in Miami, Florida. It's one of the most conservative Zionist communities in the country. And, also it's a mix ethnically of like Mizrahi Jews, Russian Jews, Jews from Latin America. So, um, surrounded by traditionally very conservative communities with like very diverse histories. And that was kind of the water that I swam in. I went to like a Solomon Schechter day school until the eighth grade, where I really enjoyed actually text study and like, studying Chumash and Talmud and stuff like that. But also found the school somewhat authoritarian and not the Zionism didn't bother me at all. That was awesome. I love that. But there were other pieces of it that didn't fit as well. Um, and yeah, I mean, my mom was a pretty ardent Zionist, even though she was like kind of a liberal Zionist, like on the Board of Peace now. Uh, but and I think she's like continually is always like, why were you such a Zionist? Like that didn't come from me, but that is definitely not true. I definitely absorbed um,
Yeah.
a lot of that. And yeah, I mean, like I think I had like a very sort of traditional, like establishment conservative upbringing. I went to summer camp, I went on the March of the Living, I spent time in Israel. Um, yeah, and it like wasn't until I went to public school, so I had a lot of different kinds of friends. I didn't just have like a Jewish circle in high school. And by the time I got to college, I was not like so like I wasn't like doing Jewish things all the time. And actually, it wasn't until I started to lose my Zionism that I actually became more involved with my Jewish life again. Um,
And
so
that did that mostly come through getting involved with If Not Now at the start?
yeah, yeah,
How
exactly.
did you how did that begin? Like what was your initial connection point that pulled you in?
Well, I mean, it was 2014. It was the Gaza war in 2014, and it kind of all fell apart for me at once. I spent a couple weeks sort of like crying in my room, and then uh, went actually to a JVP uh rally in Columbus Circle, and it was like a little too much for me too soon. It was like a Palestinian solidarity rally. And somebody told me, actually, it was Morgan Bassicus told me about this new group that was going to be doing an action, which was If Not Now. And that I kind of immediately was sort of, I didn't know anyone. I was much older than a lot of the people there, but I kind of immediately was like, I need to be here. Like, I need to be involved in this. And I really threw myself into it for the next couple years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I started rabbinical school in 2013. Um and paid while I was there, the first year was in Israel. Spent a bunch of time helping organize Protective Presence work around the olive harvest, and then came back in 2014 when all of this was going on. And like it's funny because I think you and I are the same age. I
Uh-huh.
felt like if not now, like I was like, oh, they're too young for me, and and that I also had this whole thing where like
I
I
was
was,
definitely the oldest person in the room
yeah.
alive.
Yeah, and I was just scared of like what it would do to my career if I got involved then, right? Like I knew that this was the future, but yeah, it was just a weird time to be a New York Jew while all of this was just beginning to collapse. Um and like how how did that jibe with the kind of Chumash and Talmud you grew up with, right? Like that this was now the way that like you were expressing your Judaism. Did you see a connection between the two, or how did they like, yeah.
No, and honestly, like I feel grateful that I had the chance to like develop some textual literacy. And I think that it's like pretty important to me being able to do this work now. Although on some level, I can't actually tell you exactly why. And it feels like a thread in my life that has been like totally dropped just for lack of time to do something like that. And like the feeling that like I haven't quite found the right community. Like, I don't know, like learning Torah is almost like a dance party or something. It's like if it's not the right vibe for you, then like, I don't know.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Like you like what there's no point in going to a Torah study where the people that are going to be talking about it aren't bringing the same like kind of lenses of analysis that you have. It's
Totally.
like going to a dance party with a bunch of people that weird you out. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I just I haven't really picked that back up, but it hasn't been it's interesting because I talk about it so much and I talk about how a certain measure of literacy is going to have to undergird, what comes next for Jewish life in America if it's going to mean anything. But my own experience of that is just at this point, you know, has been behind me for 30 years or something,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and it's a fascinating kind of like conundrum on the ACJ end too, because like there's such a wide variety of levels of Jewish literacy of people that want the kind of education that we're doing, and it's really hard to like meet all of those different folks, like people who are like new to Torah, people that grew up at day school, like coming to one place because it shares that level of analysis. And yeah, I mean that's something I actually we should talk about at another time. But um, the it's interesting because you like ended up going down a different text line of Judaism, right? Like going from um growing up in Schechter and the kind of like quote unquote traditional text line that like our institutions lift up as the primary, you then jumped into this other like really deep American historical text line of Jewish communism. Um,
no, I
how
didn't.
did you?
I didn't. I mean, like when I came, I think that like there was a lot of disappointment actually on the part of the old Jewish Currents leadership that that handed us the keys to the magazine 8 years ago or whatever, because I think that they expected that we would know that history, that we would know the history that they came out of. They were mostly red diaper babies, children of people, like, grew up in the coops in the Bronx or whatever, like, uh, you know, family members fighting in the Spanish Civil War, or, I mean, this was the milieu that the magazine came out of. Also like Yiddish socialists, Yiddish communists, whatever, this kind of thing. And I think it was a huge disappointment that like, most of us were raised basically by like Zionists who maybe, like my grandparents owned a bodega and were not interested in politics at all, you know. Um,
But you know it now. Like
I
you
know it
just
now. I know
yeah.
it now, but I didn't at the time. And like I didn't and also like it's come to me now essentially as an oral history. Like I didn't spend the last 8 years reading about that history. I spent the last 8 years meeting some of the people who and getting to know them on a deep level, some of the people who came out of this history. And like I've spent the last 8 years reading the magazine and also like the things that that people sent to me thinking that it should be in the magazine. And a lot of it didn't make it in, but I certainly learned a lot about what the touchstones for this community were. I mean, when I came in, every year we would get people yelling at me because we weren't commemorating the deaths of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And like for me, I was like, what do you mean? Like, what do you want us to do? You know? But also just like recognizing what the dates were, what the touchstones were for this community was hugely um, important and interesting.
Yeah. I I wonder now, like in this moment of reflection, do you see or can you like articulate what that like I mean just the way you just described it, right? With like the special dates and the martyr figures and the like particular language, like it's its own almost denomination of American Judaism.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you like spend a couple minutes articulating for like me and then the other folks like how you would describe that now?
Yeah, I mean, like the magazine, the magazine is was founded in 1946. It was the magazine of the Communist Party for Jews in the United States. Um, it had one editor for close to 50 years, Morris Shappies, who was actually imprisoned for perjury um, as a CUNY professor, basically just as part of an anti-communist purge. And you know, this community was, the magazine was in English, but it was very engaged in sort of Yiddish culture. It was, a communist, it got money from the Communist Party. It was a Communist Party organ. It really defended the Soviet Union way, way longer than most people thought was prudent, and only split with the party in 1956 after Khrushchev's speech. So it really had a lot of soul searching to do. A lot of the people associated with the magazine, and certainly a lot of the children of those communists, were extremely disillusioned and felt like their parents were too dogmatic, did not read the writing on the wall. They really, very Romance of American Communism style, like with Vivian Gornick. Um, and they were fiercely, fiercely secular. That word, as I think people have heard me talk about, really means something very specific to the older readers and members of Jewish Currents. And yeah, they I think had softened like as they aged, So also there was a big split between the communists and the socialists, and they
Mhm.
came together in Jewish Currents, like I think in the 90s. So it took all that time for like, these like multi-generations of communists and socialists to reconcile, and they did so on the board of Jewish Currents. But at that point, in many ways, the community that they were coming from was sort of a dwindling community that had, in many important aspects, failed to reproduce itself. And so it's not surprising that like the group of people that took over were, you know, kids who had grown up like in very kind of establishment Jewish communal environments who were starting to shed some of that, but needed something new, needed a lineage to step into.
And how would you describe the way that lineage has now been used by like not just you, but like, the way that the magazine has progressed over the last 8 years? I mean,
I mean,
certainly.
good
Yeah, go ahead.
question, but I just will say, like, I didn't think about it that much as I was working through it, and maybe like to the chagrin of the people who gave us the magazine. Like, I really didn't. It wasn't like I'm for better or worse, like I feel a bit like I'm a presentist. Like I'm looking at like what is happening right now? What are the choices we have in front of us, and how do we, like are those really the choices? Like can we actually turn in one direction or another? And like, you know, people tell me things about the past and I read things about the past, but I'm not like a person who takes like most of my strength from like this came before and the ancestors and this and that. And I think that with currents, it was really useful to know that these lefties existed and also to understand the reasons that they were, or like how they were crushed,
Yeah.
like both by McCarthyism and by like the crimes of the Soviet Union and their own disillusionment and their own mistakes in like failing to fight that early enough and hard enough. Um, and uh, yeah, I mean, it was really helpful to learn, I think, even just that, like from their mistakes, like even just the question of independence in the magazine comes from the recognition of how kind of not independent they were in their founding years. Um, but I really felt like we had a lot of freedom to do what we wanted. And it was like useful to feel like there was a lineage behind us, but we also felt very confident that we could just throw out what wasn't working for us, you know.
Yeah. And now, how would you say, like, after you've gone through that process, how would you describe the kind of politics and Jewish ethos of where the magazine is now?
I mean, look, the magazine has always been essentially anti-Zionist and anti-capitalist, and you can use other words to say that. But also because it came together around being Jewish, it made a little bit more room for a sort of like multi-tendency approach, in the sense that, Jacobin is like a kind of like if Jacobin is sometimes a DSA party line kind of middle ground or something like baseline, I guess is the right word. We didn't have to do that on some level because we always had people in the magazine who uh, had different tendencies. And I always felt like a magazine is fundamentally a group and that it reflects the sensibilities of the group collectively. And like often you find yourself thinking with people in that group, even if that's not your kind of way in the world. And like what makes the magazine work is your willingness and like enthusiasm to think with those people. And so I don't think about uh, the magazine as something you can like describe by saying like this is who we are now. It's the biggest iteration of the magazine that's ever existed. It's not like the old days where there was one editor in Morris Shapi's or in Larry Bush, and then there were like other people who were around. Like there's, I think at this point, close to 16 or 17 employees, and many of those people are editors. So yeah, it's like I feel glad that I don't think we can sort of like narrow, there are people who are religious in Jewish currents, like actually religious. There are people who are not interested in any kind of practice. There are people who aren't Jewish. Like
Hmm.
just one example of like a spread that exists within the magazine. There are people who are like, really into theory, and there are people for whom that just doesn't cohere for them at all. Like that's not where they want to put their energy.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way you're describing it because kind of what's coming out from me or what I'm hearing is a sort of approach that is just about filling a void, right? Like there is a need and there is a readership, and we want to figure out how to give like those people the things they need. Um,
Well, I
is
mean, I might like switch that around because I will say
Sure.
that like I don't think that Currents has ever conceived of itself as like, I mean, it certainly had to fill a need in order to be successful, but I never thought of ourselves as like audience driven or like motivated by audience. Like I think it was more that I tried to hire people who were thinking deeply and in like unique ways about Jewishness and Jewish life and politics, Jewish politics, and tried to trust that in some way that they would be reflective of a whole, or that they would be able to like provide some thought leadership for a community, but not in like a direct sense, not in terms of like what does this community need, more like what do we need? How do we like feed each other in this group and make that public? You know, how do we like learn together and then make that public, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. You're kind of the cadre leading the intellectual like charge into the future. Which is like, I think, I mean, that is lofty language, but I don't know that there's anyone else doing that in the space of the Jewish left at this point. So like do you see where that future is headed based on who those people are, what their kind of collective thought process is?
I think that people are, I think there's a recognition that there's a lot of work to do and that we're in a moment of very intense opportunity. Like I think everyone sort of recognizes that we have um a new critical mass that needs to be consolidated, and that there's like work that we can do to do that consolidation. Certainly that's what I'm seeing. Um, but I think everyone like feels like that looks different, which is good, right? I mean, like we need more of these spaces, regardless of what they look like. Like I almost actually don't care what kind of institution someone's interested in building, as long as they're like trying to actually build something with other people that you know, that people want to do. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's like I feel like whenever someone asks me about like what is the future, I kind of dodge this question because like it's very clear to me that it doesn't exist yet. Like what we have now is a critical mass of people that want something. And like how they manifest their desires is kind of like up to them, and something will happen from that, you know. And
Is
like
there
it
something that like
doesn't really like
you
feel like it's like for me to say like what it should be or whatever.
but you're one of those people. Like there's got to like what would you want? What is something that like a vision or a different kind of configuration of the world you've been working towards look like if you could just be there?
That's a good question. I feel, I mean, most of the time these days, I think about what education looks like that feels to me like one of the most important things. I think like what I hear from like people is like what they want is synagogues. Like they need like a place to go to like take their kids. They need a place to go on holidays. They need a place for life cycle stuff if somebody dies, or, you know, like to me, you know, I don't have children, and like davening is not really like my, like I'm not that interested in prayer like on a personal level. And so like that's not where I would start. Where I feel like there's the most potential for like a shift in consciousness in Jewish life is through education. And I think, you know, maybe it's just this past couple weeks where I've been kind of steeped in like a discourse around trauma, Jewish trauma and prosthetic trauma and all of this kind of stuff, because of this piece that we published and some discussion around it. But I think for years I've been thinking about like what would it mean to have an education that like actually taught Jewish students a version of Jewish history that was a little bit more robust with real analysis in it, that didn't aim to traumatize them, that didn't
Mhm.
shield them from what is tragic and terrifying in Jewish history, but that like was not aimed to create a prosthetic trauma. Even that alone would be a very, very um, different form of Jewish education. And I also think about literacy, just because I think that we may decide that, you know, Judaism doesn't hold anything for us and, move on from it or whatever. Some of us may decide that. But I do think that if we're going to create something new, we have to have some baseline in like what exists. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of desire for something new. There's a lot of desire for belonging and togetherness, particularly among Jews who have been kicked out of communities for their political beliefs. Have did I freeze?
For just a second, your voice was fine. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, like particularly for Jews who have been like kicked out of communities, there is this desire, but like I think sometimes people are getting into a room together and being a little bit like, well, what do we do now?
Mhm.
And so I do think that one of the things that we can do together is read together. And I mean that from the point of view of Jewish texts, but I also mean that from the point of view of like other texts, you know, um, all kinds of texts. Like, I don't think that there's an enormous difference between like reading Torah, reading the Frankfurt School, reading, Molly's new book, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I think that there's like a practice of reading and learning together that that needs to be reinvented.
Yeah.
So that feels to me like the most live. Um,
Yeah.
we're
No, I
we're trying
mean,
to create like like new Jews on some level, and like most of us just had a really different experience growing up.
totally. I mean, I think, and it's, and this goes again to the question or not real question, but like thought I had before, that is like what you're describing is to a great degree what we're doing with our online courses with ACJ. And like obviously online and in-person learning are two very different things and create two very different atmospheres. Um, but even if it were in person, there is this interesting issue of like how you level the playing field in any given space like that, for people who came to Judaism recently, even just grew up like me, going to a Reform synagogue, not a day school. I went all the way through Hebrew school, and like I couldn't have told you what the Mishnah was by the time I finished like high school, right? Like I wouldn't have even known what that word meant. Um, and then someone like you who went to day school and like actually was learning Gemara when you were like 10. It's very, very different. And so no, I agree. And I feel I am of a similar type of Jew to you, which is that I think that like in the recreation of what Judaism can and will be, it will primarily happen through reading together as opposed to necessarily like I think praying together is great and good and should happen and people should do it. But the thing that really speaks to me is exactly what you're talking about, is like that learning together, that debate, that like digging into text. Um, yeah, and finding more ways to do that.
Yeah, and I also do think that like there'll probably be like a different like there'll be obviously like part of the goal here is to recover some difference because of the way that Jewish life was homogenized, and particularly towards a kind of sort of mid-century Ashkenazi American Judaism. But at the same time, I also think that, like, to the extent that uh, anti-Zionist Jews are looking to be able to do rituals together, they'll probably be kind of a re-homogenizing in like a different direction, so that we can sing together in a way that like integrates from a lot of different backgrounds, or that so that we can do rituals that also, don't completely offend our sensibilities, but still like feel rooted in something. I mean, another thing that I'm thinking about a lot, right, is like, how do we make sure that we're teaching the Nakba, like to
Mhm.
children, to adults? Like, how do we make sure that people know not just Jewish history in a different way, but that they know the history of, Israel, Palestine in a completely different way? So, yeah, I mean that feels the most live to me, as like, the thing that would feel the most transformative, you know.
Yeah, and I'd love to stay on that thread for a minute of the relationship between um, the kind of renewal or rebuilding of a Judaism that does speak to folks with a shared vision like yours and mine, and its relationship to Palestine solidarity work, because I think that like it is really hard to articulate clearly how those two things work together without accidentally over conflating them. Um, And I'd love to hear your thoughts on like where those touch points lie, where they should maybe stay a little bit more separated, even if they are um, a little bit congruous.
Yeah, I mean, like I've talked about this a lot with with Alyssa Wise, who really thinks about it as like we have to do this, but also it's totally separate from our Palestine solidarity work. And part of the reason that I feel like it's separate from our Palestine solidarity work, right, is because like for the most part, Palestinians like aren't asking us to do this. But I feel on I feel a little bit like, with if there was a more centralized Palestinian national movement, they might be asking us to do this. I mean, like, if you think about like South Africa and the way that part of what the ANC was doing was, you know, tapping like white liberals to go into white liberal spaces and kind of like decompose the belief system that undergirded apartheid. And I think that that's a fair amount of what it means right now to build alternative Judaism, is to weaken Zionism in American Jewish life, and in the Jewish world writ large, from within empire, within kind of uh, the support system for Israel's genocide. Um, and I can't say like for certain what that's going to do, but I don't see that work as separate from Palestine solidarity work. And I don't think that we're going to be like hugely successful in that work without this. To
Mhm.
the extent that American Jewish establishment politics is still one of the pillars, or at least even like a narrative pillar for American support for this. I don't actually think that Jewish public opinion has anything to do with uh, American support for Israeli wars. And I think especially what we're seeing now with the way that we're moving from military aid to uh, military integration or whatever. I don't think that has anything to do with American Jews. But I do think that having a vocal uh, group of Jews within the body politic that is contesting this politics and having that group actually be more and more powerful, there's no question to me that that will allow more things to shift, not even necessarily all at the governmental level, also like within institutions and whatnot. So I think that, I have a sort of a mentor who's always saying, there's two ways to fight. You strengthen your own camp and you weaken the enemy camp. And I think of the work that we are doing within the Jewish community against Zionism as, in a sense, both of those things, but frankly, more the second,
Yeah.
to weaken the enemy camp. Like we're drawing energy in the Jewish community away from Zionism. Um, we're making it less attractive to be Zionist, and we're creating more off ramps for more different kinds of people. And that feels like there's a lot of potential there, you know? Like it's hard to imagine what the off ramps are without this work. And it's also hard to imagine how how like the broader political narrative shifts. I mean, it could just leave Jewish politics behind entirely, and there are some like trends in that direction, but it hasn't happened yet. So yeah.
Yeah. And as you were talking about that, there's another tack-on effect that I think um, is really important, which is that building this alternative mode of anti-Zionist and like beyond Zionist Judaism also combats Christian theology, right?
Mhm.
Like when we're not playing the role they need us to play for Christian Zionism, then their own form of Zionism starts crumbling as well. Um, and so, yeah, it's not even just about the Jewish institutions. It is also about combating the theological implications of Christian Zionism. Yeah, no, that thank you. Yeah.
I mean,
Um,
I want to be clear that like I don't think it means that we don't do all the other things that we're doing in
of course.
direct support of Palestinian liberation. I just don't see like a clear line. And it almost seems like if we were waiting for some kind of centralized Palestinian authority to say to us, like, this is what solidarity looks like, we're not going to get that because of the way that Palestinian politics looks in this moment. And so if that's the you know measure of whether we're doing solidarity work or not, then yeah, like we're not, because nobody, like individuals in the Palestinian movement might ask us to do this work or might recognize its value, but like we're not in a place where it's going to be collectively recognized. But I'll just say for myself, like I just don't consider these things as like separate things.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also the reality that you can't ask the people who are holding the political movement work and like doing that really, really hard labor of organizing and building those like lines of solidarity across difference to like, and I'm talking about, like JVP and Christians United for Palestine and all of these groups to do that work and to hold the like spiritual, cultural renovation work that needs to be done in all of our communities as well.
No,
Like
and it
doing
doesn't,
both
it
simultaneously is,
doesn't,
yeah.
I haven't seen that work
Mm-mm.
personally. I mean, like obviously there are people who like they do this in one space and they do that in the other space, but the institutions themselves have a hard time holding all of it, and they shouldn't have to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. All right, we've got 40 some odd people in the Zoom. Um, we are in a little bit. I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to open it up to you all asking questions, which will mean that I'll let you turn your video on and if you have a question. But what I'm going to ask is as we like finish up with this last question, that if you have a question kind of like boiling in your mind right now, to maybe write it down and make sure whatever you write down ends with a question mark. Um, the goal is to ask Arielle questions, and sometimes that might require a little context before you get to the question. But I want it to be a question, not a share out. Um, and I will also open up the chat if you want to put questions in the chat. Um, and so, kind of as a final question, unless no one else has questions, then I'll ask you more questions. Um, Now that you're moving on to this new role, what are the things you're most excited about having time to do? And what are you also like looking towards like staying in, right? Like this is the piece you just wrote that like we have to all stay in it. And you now have new options as to what that looks like for you. So what are you looking forward to and what are you hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, and like it may be a little bit premature for me to answer it, to be honest. I mean, something that I have been pretty clear about with myself is that I'm going to give myself a little bit of time to rest. Sorry, my allergies are going crazy right now through the window, but I'm going to give myself a little bit of time to rest, and then I'm going to start to organize again. And I've been thinking about like where and what does that mean? I think definitely like I want to get back involved. I want to get involved in DSA because it's an exciting time in New York City to
Yeah,
help in DSA. Um, and I also am sort of interested in like different institution building efforts, nascent institution building efforts, in the Jewish world. I feel like, I just spent 8 years helping to build an institution and I've built up some institutional knowledge that could be useful elsewhere. And so like I want to make sure that like I'm I'm involved in something collective that is toward new institution building. But all of that feels like so nascent that it doesn't, I feel like I can't even talk about it yet.
sure.
And like writing is always on the table, but it's also like I'm trying not to put too much pressure on myself since I just like started this transition and I don't want to already be like, why am I not writing?
Yeah.
Um, but I have, there are things that I'm exploring intellectually and like thinking about and want to get out there,
Is there
whether it's
anything in particular you're excited about?
writing.
Any of it? Like, is there something like DSA, obviously, like we're living in Mamdani's New York, of course, but like a thing that like is really like giving you the sparkle.
What's giving me the sparkle right now is like not being super stressed, like playing squash in the middle of the day on Friday. Like that's giving me a sparkle right now. I just don't know. It's only been a few weeks actually too.
Yeah,
And I'm like, and I'm like readjusting to like a different relationship to time. So I'm like, things are getting weird, you know?
yeah,
So we'll see.
cool.
Yeah.
All right, folks who are here with us on Zoom, you are now invited to turn on your video if you've got a question, or to put it in the chat if you've got a question. There's so many of you. Oh, all right. The Karchers, thank you for being here. Just asked you to unmute Martin and compatriot. All right.
Oh,
Martin, do you have a question?
No, just wanted to join.
Oh, okay. Great.
we got David here though.
Yeah, David, good to see you.
You're muted still.
Yeah, you're gonna have to come off mute, David.
Okay, thanks. Good to see you too, Andy, and very nice to meet you, Arielle. Who chose title from from Gramsci, Optimism of Hope, one or the other or both, and why did you choose that?
Wait, which
I
title?
the
It was your conversation was kind of under a headline, The Optimism of Hope, which I am assuming is from Gramsci's
yes,
Yeah.
but
famous statement.
Arielle used it in her conversation with Rabbi Brant Rosen,
Okay.
and that's
Could
why I
you,
used it.
oh, okay. So could you, Arielle, could you tell us about that conversation and how you used it at that time?
Yeah, I mean, like we were talking in the conversation with Brant, we were talking about the relationship to despair. And Brant was talking about how, as a rabbi, he at SEDEC Chicago, where he's transitioning out as well, that he's always been really good at basically wrapping things up in a hopeful bow at the end of the sermon, and how, like, actually recently that's been pretty difficult to do. And I we were talking about how for me I've always had a little bit of tension actually with like some of the activists in the audience, because I feel like it's important to face the despair, and that sometimes like the thing that you can do that is the most strengthening for your readership is to validate some of their kind of realism around like what is actually happening, and recognize too that like it doesn't mean that we give up, that actually we keep going without even if we think that there's no way that we can um, improve the situation, we do it because it's the right thing to do. And so um, you know we referenced the kind of you know pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, you know
Yeah.
idea.
Thanks. I, I'm tempted to ask a follow-up if Andy will let me. I was so struck what just the words a practice of reading, and I couldn't agree more. Certainly been what has sustained me to reach the age of 80. So, and anything you might want to say about developing a practice of reading would be fantastic.
I think that what I mean by that, I am thinking about it as a communal practice, and like thinking about like what is at the core of our like ancient technologies of learning. It's like reading a text with a partner and discussing it. I mean, that's also like at the core of like, the communist reading group or whatever, it's like that is a kind of form of togetherness that is like both like core to a kind of leftist tradition and core to Jewish tradition. And for me, um, I think we feel less alone when we are working with text. We feel more grounded when we are working with text. We and again, I still mean like text in the broad sense, we are like we are more active when we are working with texts, especially with others, like we're more active readers and thinkers. So I guess that's kind of what I envision.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, people are getting brave.
It's like an aliveness. Yeah.
Now we have people getting brave. Um, so one person asked about conversations about secularism at Currents, and I think you could talk about that for far too long. So I want to direct person whose name on here is main account to the on the nose episode. Um,
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, there's an On the Nose episode, which is Arielle's podcast at Currents, where she and some other like new currents people are talking with the old guard about the differences between their approaches to Judaism and Jewishness. Allison,
Yeah,
Mhm. Did you want to say anything else about
you'll
it before we move on?
get everything. No, just that you'll get everything that you need from that podcast episode. It's the best version of that conversation.
Allison Glick, first of all, said thank you, but then said that what do you think anti-Zionist Jewish writers should be focusing on as part of our support for Palestinian liberation?
Like writers specifically,
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, like, I don't feel like that is like, sorry, I'm still looking for this podcast episode, but
I
I'll
can
find
find
it.
it if you want to. I'll find it if you want to answer the question.
I don't think that like that doesn't feel like it's my job. I would say that like my advice in general, as you're right, is to think about what are the questions that you hold. Like when you are, I think one of the prerequisites is being in the work, like actually doing something. And as you're doing the work, what are the questions that are pulling you? Like what makes it harder to do the work? What makes it easier? What feels unclear? And like, what like when you're getting together with like a group to figure out what to do, like what are the things that are stumping you? And then like for me, that those questions are the questions um of what we need to be writing about, because if you're encountering those questions, then other people are encountering them, and that's sort of like what the practice of writing is all about. So like, I guess that's a cop out, but it's just not for me to answer that question. I think like that question is always evolving as the work is evolving and as like the situation around us is evolving, But when I think about like what's the next thing that I'm writing, it's usually like something is happening right now and it doesn't quite make sense yet. And like I may need to read a little bit more to understand how other people answered this question. I may need to talk to people in my life who are confronting it, and then I'm gonna, reflect it back.
Great. Josh, you are asked to unmute. There you go. Thank you.
Hi, thank you both for the incredible work that you do. I've been a devoted current subscriber for some time now, and I've started listening to ACJ material relatively recently. Um, I work in New York and live in Jersey City, and I've been volunteering on the Brad Lander campaign. And I was recently at the If Not Now Shabbat where he spoke. Um, I'm wondering, like, as a non-Zionist myself, what do you think the relationship, both in and out of the Jewish community, should be between non or anti-Zionists and liberal but anti-occupation, anti-genocide Zionists like Brad?
That's a really
Great
great
question.
question. That's a really great question. I think, look, Brad in some ways is like almost a special case because well, first of all, Brad has been engaging with left communities, like, been a member of JFREJ and whatnot for a really, really long time. It's like, you know, I wouldn't say that most liberal and progressive Zionists in New York City have the track record and the profile that Brad has, and, I mean, like, even just the fact that he's calling it a genocide. I mean, I know that there are people um, who are in the liberal Zionist camp who are doing that, but it's still, you know, like over at CBE, you have Rabbi Timmer spending a lot of energy and time like fighting the Park Slope Food Co-op vote, so it's a very different, it feels like apples to oranges. And so even still, I think that, if we are talking about electoral politics, I'm not like, far be it for me to say like, we should keep out liberals of any kind. I think our job is to bring liberals in. Um, but I also think that that doesn't mean that they get a pass, I mean, Simone Zimmerman wrote a piece earlier, maybe like even last year at this point, called Rhetoric Without Reckoning. And she kind of like lays out like um, a rubric for like what liberal communities can do to start dealing with like what happened over the course of the genocide. And um, I don't think that like that work is always like that we should be litmus testing in order to like decide whether we work with people in a electoral sense. I think that if we're building power, we recognize when it's necessary to partner with the people we need to partner with. But I think when we're thinking of like Jewishly, who are our partners Jewishly in like building the next iteration of Jewish life, that's a different question. And I want to repeat, I really don't think of Brad in the same category, frankly, because he has been extremely consistent in showing solidarity with a lot of marginalized groups in the city and has not made support for Palestine liberation a litmus test also on his side of the aisle.
Awesome. That was a very, very good answer. Thank you. Louis.
Hi. Yeah, also thank you for all your work you're doing. And it's been amazing seeing the magazine, um, grow over the last 8 years. Um, you addressed it in responding to Josh's question, but when you mentioned earlier about not, your connection to belonging to a temple and prayer, it made me think of Peter Beinart and him belonging to, a modern Orthodox or something close to, and specifically belonging to a community that at its core is radically against, your own anti-Zionist beliefs. And so my question has to do with, I mean, it's a little personal, so of course I understand you don't want to answer, but like, what are the spaces or are there spaces where you do feel comfortable kind of putting down the very legitimate critiques we have of Zionist and mainstream, or even to the right of mainstream, um, American Judaism, with the fact that there are some people that have those beliefs who are family or parts of our community, and from our own self-interest, there might be reason to engage with them for one reason or another. So I guess, my question has to do with, where do you draw those lines? Like, do you,
I mean,
because I
I went
think,
on Daniel Gordis's podcast last week, so
okay.
I mean, my feeling is like if somebody wants to platform me, I will have that conversation. And but like it's not a reciprocal, like nobody needs to hear Daniel Gordis on my podcast, but it might be important for his reader, his listenership to hear me. So like in terms of the public conversation, I'm basically willing to have most any conversation. Because if they are inviting me, you know, I wouldn't like speak at the 92nd Street Y right now because there's a boycott on, but I would speak to those people in another context. As far as like my family, I went to my family reunion a few weeks ago in Columbus, Ohio. I have a big family, and most of them are, of course, Zionists. And it was pretty difficult, but I basically resolved that whenever it came up and people know what I do, and there's a lot of feelings about that, that I was going to have that conversation. And I had it over and over again. It was exhausting. I felt sometimes a little bit like Charlie Kirk, where it's like sitting there like Israel is a genocidal apartheid state, change my mind or whatever, you know. But but I have seen in my own immediate family the ways in which repeated exposure has been the kind of ticket. Um, and, you know, there was a point in my family reunion where I sat down with three of my cousins who are sisters who are religious, very ardent Zionists, and they just asked me questions for 3 hours. And I have a lot of patience for that kind of work. And I don't think that I don't think everyone feels comfortable doing it, and I don't think everyone should, but I feel like it's part of my responsibility and my role to do it. Freddie is,
Awesome. All right, Freddie.
you're muted. Oh, now you're good.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering, Arielle, about the whether you would be willing to broaden your description of what it means to be Jewish, in the sense that I grew up as a red diaper baby. I went to Shul when I was a kid in the 60s. My mother was a full-time organizer in Newark before the Black community got more consolidated and powerful. So I kind of come from that older tradition, and I also grew up. One grandmother was a communist, and one grandmother was an immigrant, booby. And I realize that younger people don't have that direct connection to a culture of Jewishness. But I have a really hard time personally with defining Jewishness around Judaism, the religion. And I'm secular with a capital S. I've become more spiritual and in community, in Jewish communities, praying or making up new rituals. And I think there's a place for that, but I don't have Torah at all, or
Yeah, I mean,
texts like
Freddie,
that at
I
the
think
center of my
I think
Jewishness. Yeah.
that I think the podcast that we put in the chat is really going to be like tell you everything you need to know about this. But I guess to be clear, I am not interested in being religious either. But there has to be some, like you were sustained by a connection to Judaism that is part of a world that no longer exists. Like we don't have the political
It does
centrality.
exist.
Well,
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
much diminished. I mean, like we don't have the connection to Jewish languages. We don't have the connection to like an immigrant experience. We don't have the connection to a party like the American Communist Party. We don't, you know, I mean, like just to be clear, like all of the things that rooted this community in like a Jewish life that was rooted elsewhere no longer exists for young people in like, you know, in the United States. And so there has to be some way of uh, regrouping, and we can't regroup as immigrants, for example. We can't like you know redo that. We are Americans now. We can't recreate the political conditions that existed at that time. We can't, you know, like just by process of elimination, there's not that much left um, besides Judaism itself, which and that doesn't mean that we have to practice Judaism in a certain way, or that circumscribes us. It just gives us a home base of some place to start exploring.
And I'd
Well, I
also,
think there are other home bases. At work, you know, at Workers Circle in Boston, we've created a very large community of people, including children. And it's around, as a Jew, our progressivism is our definition of Jewishness. And, that's oversimplifying it, but that's
Yeah,
a
but
very
that's not
strong
connected.
connection.
I can be a leftist in the United States without being a Jew. Very, very easily. Like
Right.
there's nothing that, and frankly, like the children of people who were in this community largely became progressives, but didn't stay Jews. And I'm not trying to get anyone to stay Jews, by the way. Like, I don't care whether, it's like people can leave and feel good about that, or people can stay. But this way of life did not reproduce itself on the scale that it needed to as like a Jewish, and I think that is like the hard truth of it. Not like, it's not like my opinion or whatever. It just is what happened historically. And so like I think there has to also be room for this generation to try to figure out for ourselves, with the conditions that surround us, what we do with that, you know?
I also just want to add in that there is a like burgeoning, like global and like locally rooted and globally connected attempt to create a neo-Bund that draws upon the values of these historical Jewish communal traditions of Jewish communism and Jewish socialism. It's why like Molly Crabapple's book is like a huge New York Times bestseller. Um, and I think in large part because of what it symbolizes, as much as for what it is within it. And so, like, one thing that I think is really is possible in this moment, because as Arielle was saying, like, there is a desire for this stuff, and there are like so many new formations popping up that Freddie like working to figure out how to bring your story and the story of your family and the story of the people of your generation into an accessible format for people to draw upon as that tradition, could be incredibly helpful for these young Jews who are trying to like revive this communist, secular, Jewish American ness. And so I would really ask you to think about how that might be possible, because it there's a desire for it out there.
For sure. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your question, Freddie.
But that Bund is not going to look like, I mean,
No,
because
no.
the Bund was made of workers, like,
Well,
and
it'll look like
now
Jewish
Jews
Currents
are,
looks,
yeah, right.
right? Jewish Currents was a
Right.
Communist Party outlet, and the ACJ for a long time was very, very different than what it is right now. And this is what like I'm a rabbi, so I'm going to say this is what all Torah is, right?
Totally.
Like the Torah is always about reinventing what it once was into something that the people that made the original one couldn't have even imagined. And there's a whole story in the Talmud about this happening. So like, I'm not making this up. We are about 10 minutes over. There are a couple questions still in the chat. Do you want me to ask them, or are you ready to rest, Arielle?
Whatever. I mean, it looks like there's only one question
There's
that
two.
you.
There's one about whether this one's a very easy one. Like in New York now, what is your community? Not necessarily a shul.
I think it's pretty ad hoc. I feel like I can't really answer that with like, there's this congregation or this, it's like I've been going to some, I go to stuff with like the Sephardi Mizrahi, J. Fred Caucus. I go to current stuff. I go to like, um, JVP stuff. So it's like, I kind of feel a little bit like, I feel like I have a very rich Jewish life, but I'm not like getting it all in one place.
Like
So,
a particular Jewish home.
yeah.
Yeah. And this is a great question. In growing Jewish currents, you gained a huge audience, and I imagine a lot more scrutiny. Was it difficult to become such a public persona? Was that a source of stress, and how did you withstand it?
It sucked. It was terrible. And it was something that sorry about the noise. It was something that I resisted quite a lot. And in fact, like in the beginning of Currents, I Jacob Plitman, who is the publisher, did like almost all of our public appearances, and it occurred to me, and then Peter Beinart joined, who's obviously like very public, and it occurred to me that if I didn't start to speak to people or like be more public, then these men were going to get all the credit for my work, which was already happening. Like nobody knew that I was the editor of Jewish Currents. They figured it was Peter or that it was Jacob or whatever. And, in becoming more public, I was probably starting to like really step into that. And then October 7th happened. And then it was just like a totally different level of visibility, and also like this sense of like almost suddenly being like a weird kind of politician, even without any power or any, it was like um constantly the feeling of like speaking for, even without a constituency that was just the subscribership of the magazine. And it also came with a lot more criticism, and I don't really mind criticism from like the right or the center or liberals or whatever, but a lot of criticism from the left, and that stings in a completely different way. And yeah, it has been really difficult. I actually still don't really like to speak publicly. You know, it's not like something that I relish. And like I feel stung often, when, like when I'm being attacked online or whatever, and but I have gotten better at both things, or at least at the emotional experience of both things, as I've had more practice. Um, and yeah, it has started to feel like less fraught and more okay. Even the attacks, like I know when I have to just like get offline and like not look for a while or whatever. Because the in-person experience or like the face-to-face experience is never like that. So
Yeah. I mean, Twitter in particular is the worst place on earth. I don't even know if it's on earth. So I hope that moving into your new position also lets you get the hell off of Twitter. um,
God willing.
Arielle, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for all that you've given all of us through these 8 years. Thank you for your generosity being here tonight and answering all these questions. Um, Thank you for what is to come, because I can't wait to see, once you have rested and feel good and ready, what you're going to do next. Yeah, everyone here, thank you for being here. Do remember that the ACJ runs on donations, most often from folks like yourselves. If you go to acjna.org, there's a donate button, and I would be very grateful. And I'll also say, even though, I mean, you can say it if you want, Arielle, but that's also true of Jewish Currents. So please donate to both, and donate often. We need it. The people that we are up against have literally billions of dollars. Our next conversation is going to be July 2nd or 3rd. Look on our Instagram, with Dr. Walter Isaac. It's a very different topic. He is a rabbi, and he is an academic that studies the Hebrew Israelite community in America and beyond. And we're going to be talking about the roots of that community, how it shows up in various formations in America, and what that means with relationship to what it means to be an American Jew, because they consider themselves Jews and have often had a very difficult time being considered Jews by the mainstream white institutional sphere. So join us for that as well. Thank you all so much, and see you soon. Bye.